Hey everybody, Mike with Games Play Badly, and today on Session 0 I have Ryan and Josh with Bleak Horizon Press. I had a hard time getting that out for some reason. And they're here to talk about a setting that can be bolted onto several different ttrpg systems called All Must Bow. Now this has already been out and they're coming out with an expansion for it as well. Imagine creating your character and creating your world that you come from and creating the race that you are, as well as creating some sort of not so divine figure that is guiding the way that you live your character's life. I'm oversimplifying it. There's more in the interview. You got to watch it to take a look, but it sounds fantastic. And as usual, I have my Dungeon Glitch Gem Firefly t-shirt on, and I love these shirts, as I say every time. If you would like a shirt like this, or a mug, or a flag, by all means, go up to gemfirefly.com, pick out whatever you like, and at the end, right before you check out, in the promo box, put in Badly15, B-A-D-L-Y 15 at checkout for 15% off your order. If you like this video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. I can't wait for you to get a chance to meet Ryan and Josh. That interview starts now. Josh, Ryan, how are you?
Very well,
Hi.
thanks. How are you, Mike?
Very good, thanks. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for
Thanks
having us.
us.
Absolutely. Your project is really interesting to me because of just the setting alone. Why don't you go ahead and tell us more about your project?
Sure. So it's about 70-page zine, a setting, system agnostic, called All Must Bow. It's a cosmic horror world, sort of a space opera-y setting where you play as the evil scions of horrible cosmic god monsters from beyond time and space. And you have to fight against doing their bidding or trying to build your own power while the universe crumbles around you.
Yeah, and these beings you referred to as ancients, right?
Dreadful ancient things.
Yeah,
that's our term.
we had to come up with something that was sufficiently menacing and also not taken. So that's where we landed. But I really like the word dreadful. I'll overuse it if you let me. So I'm glad we fit that one in there.
Yeah, I mean, because this setting is so, just for people who haven't seen it, because I have, haha. And in between each kind of chapter, there's kind of a little vignette, and those really set the tone for the setting as a whole, and it is absolutely terrifying.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think what we were inspired by there was a lot of the material that gaming companies were putting out in the 90s. I used to play a lot of White Wolf. Ryan, you did too, right?
Yeah, I didn't get to play a whole lot, but I had the books. So I would read through the books, and my favorite parts were always the couple of pages of story in between every chapter. And that made me more sort of feel like I was more connected to the world because I didn't get a chance to play.
Yeah, and so, you know, a lot of game systems, they work in flavor with the crunch. And since we have no crunch of our own, the flavor has to really be there as often and as fully as it can. So the stories, I think I'm glad they have that effect for you, because yeah, we really needed them to put the world forward for us.
Yeah, just the first little vignette that I read, it harkened back to a feeling I get with some of the stuff that I deal with, which is what's more terrifying is the person and not necessarily the situation. So when I think about certain zombie shows, we all know which those, what turns out to be more scary than the zombies is actually the people fighting them. And that's kind of what I got from the initial few that I read. So good stuff.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I often think about something that I read in Burroughs. I'm pretty sure it was William S. Burroughs. He says at one point, the face of evil is always the face of total need. You know, so it sort of like strips back the presumption of morality. And if you think of it that way, it becomes a really interesting question of like, what could someone need so badly that they would become so monstrous?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, rather than looking at that question on a terrestrial scale where it's depressing, where it's sad, it's just like, God, it's just addiction. It's just horrible. When you look at it on a cosmic scale, then it can become epic. It can become something fascinating. Like, no, this thing is huge and it needs to eat planets.
Right.
It needs to do that. So
I thought immediately as a DM, I feel like this is a lot of this stuff rests squarely on the player's shoulders as far as how the game's going to go.
yeah, I mean, I think we both, because we both have run plenty of games before this,
Mhm.
I think we're both very interaction heavy storytellers, you know, trying to get player buy-in a
Mhm.
lot. Like I might even overdo that sometimes, but you know, especially with this setting where one of the driving ideas is just the absolute vastness of space. There's so much room for the players to say, yeah, there was this planet and then this planet, and each one of them had these, you know, 19 different cultures. Like, bring it on, let's do it. You know,
Mhm.
just spit it all out. I want to reward players who take the time to come up with that stuff. I tried to sit in on a game once at a local shop, and I didn't know these people, and I approached them, I thought, with humility. I brought a one-page backstory that I'd written for my character, and I meekly handed it to the DM, and he was like, I didn't ask for that. And he just ignored it. And I was like,
Wow.
ooh, I
Yeah.
don't, you know, I want to be the opposite of that.
Right.
There's
mean,
there's a lot of schools DMing in that way too, or just in your tables in general. Like some people thrive on just having bare stats, creating their characters during the course of the game, and or using pre-mades or whatever, and that's totally fine. But I think Josh and I are both those players who will agonize over our character backgrounds and try to like get the DM to integrate them into the future storylines and things like that. So I think we made a game for people like ourselves who want to really dig in and have some control over their characters.
Yeah, I mean that is very obvious during the character creation process because there's a lot of leeway there for characters or for players to create their characters, their home worlds, their backstories, for that matter, the way in which they channel that kind of divine or non-divine power. Why don't you explain the character creation process for me?
Sure. So you start off creating your dreadful ancient thing. You come up with sort of the overarching qualities of this monstrous inhuman creature that can span centuries and warp time and all of that, and you sort of decide what its primary qualities are, what it wants, or what people think it wants, because not all of them are knowable in that way. And you give yourself sort of like a large box to fit your character within, and then you go through building your home world, whether that means a space station or like a planetary ship that you're on, or a literal planet, or whatever you want it to be in that way.
Pocket
And
dimension.
yeah, anything like that, and you build your species for your character based off of that idea. They sort of go hand in hand, and then finally you get down to your character themselves and why that individual of the species you've created has attached themselves to this horrible creature and is serving them in some way.
Yeah, and that can go a few ways. You know, if we go back to the initial four characters, you can have people like Ryan's character who owe their very existence to the ancient, who were basically nothing before they were sort of spawned or mutated into existence. And then you have characters like one of the other ones who was very complex on his own. He was a guy who was from an imperialistic humanoid culture. He had super sophisticated programming background. He had uploaded his consciousness, and he had also created an AI. The two of them merged, and then the dreadful ancient thing gets involved. It sort of ropes them in. So, you know, the ancient can be the thing that drives you from the beginning, or it can be something that comes in once the character is already quite well developed. It all depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
I think we built the system too so that your session 0 and your session 1, building your character can be a part of the story. It doesn't have to be something that takes place before the game starts in a typical a bunch of characters meet at a bar sort of thing. Your early sessions can be your party coming under the thrall of something and developing that nature in and of itself and building those backstories as well. And I think that's a viable aspect of play and can be just as thrilling. And so we wanted to have that option available as well. It's like, okay, well these creatures clearly have deep reasoning and like horrible pasts, and that aspect of them can be just as fun to play through as just starting as these power hungry monsters.
Right. So the character creates her own dreadful ancient thing, and they basically hand that on. Would they hand that off to you, and then you would basically kind of run that for the story?
Yeah, the DM would take control of the DAT, as we call them, and see fit to use them however they want. They don't have to be a absolutely physical force in the world that comes and chats with their character. They can be as obtuse or abstract as the storyteller needs them to be at any given moment.
Yeah, I like to think of them as the thing that drives you. So you know, they could be a source of dreams and visions. They can be a source of impulses you find it difficult to control and that complicate a scene in a way that adds drama. They can be, you know, something that grants you the power or the access that you need, but also makes your life more difficult. And so, you know, it can seem like a big responsibility. Say you had a group of 5 people and everybody created their own ancient. I think with an index card of notes of those major qualities and a decent rapport with the player, like understanding what the player character is about, I think it's not burdensome. In many ways, it's fun, you know. And there are types of almost bow stories where everyone has the same ancient. You know, all of the players could collaborate on one and say that all of their characters are tied to that thing in some way. And you know, I think while that would kind of simplify it in a sense, it can also deepen it. You know, you can plumb the depths of like, well, who has what kind of relationship with this thing?
Yeah. Who's closer?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Who's in favor at any given moment, because the favor of these things can change, you know, any second. And that's part of it. We want the world to feel like it's crumbling in as a whole. Entropy is a really big part of this game. And the fickle nature of your horrible masters is a big part of that entropy as well.
Yeah. Well, it's like, does an ant's behavior make sense to me? Sure. I mean, if I think about it, but will my behavior ever make sense to an ant? Probably not. So that's the kind of thing, like, you know, a player character's ancient doesn't have to behave in a consistent way. It's a millennia old monstrosity. Like, it's not supposed to make sense. So as long as you hit the right notes, you know, it's more about feel and tone. It doesn't have to be some sort of like, well, my character's god has these symbols and has this temple and this place is just go bigger.
Right.
That's what we're trying to do. Go bigger.
You definitely have. Again, from what I've kind of gone through already, you definitely have. I look at it from the standpoint of this is role-playing gold, and from the DM standpoint, and you know, from those players who are willing to go through this process, there is a lot to pack and unpack there. And I also feel like it's very collaborative from the standpoint of it's collaborative world building. So they're creating their own world, they're creating their own race, they're creating their own, and that is all stuff that can be incorporated into future adventures as well. So, you know, those now you can say, okay, when a new player comes, well, these are kind of the ancients that are out there, and these are their motivations. And would you like one of these, or you create your own? And then all of a sudden you have this massive amount of resources for any player who comes to play your game.
Yeah,
absolutely. And your storyteller has to prep less because they have a bunch of pre-made locations that have some sort of fleshed out background, maybe not extensively, but at least something to have a story hook formed around. It's already there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One
Right.
of the most unpleasant feelings I've encountered at the gaming table is either as a player or as a DM feeling like I'm the one doing all the work. So we really wanted to bake collaboration into All Must Bow from character creation on, because, you know, especially if you're going to be sort of negotiating the borders of you know, evil, of like what's okay and what's not okay, your group has to have a good dynamic. And if you're building the world together, I think that goes a long way toward that.
Right. I think you're absolutely correct. And the players as a whole are more invested in everything. I think that's the most unique aspect of this. If you were to compare what you've done with any other game on the market, do you have anything you can compare it to?
Let's see. Okay, if you took Eclipse Phase and shoved it through Merkborg, maybe, or if you, yeah, I don't know,
Well,
Ryan, what?
so I think maybe part of the inspiration for the game is a thing to compare it to. We built this game around fate because the system is very open-ended, but the inspiration for it in part comes from Abyssals and Infernal from the Exalted series.
Yeah.
Where you're playing villains and you have you're chained to these greater entities as well. And that's, the world is obviously very set in those games, but we wanted to sort of capture a little bit of that feel that those games have. So I think it definitely has like a heritage from that kind of a world.
Yeah, that's definitely true. The great thing about those, having played the two of them and run the two of them, there's the sort of gradation of what the like dark master figure is. In the Exalted world, if you were an Abyssal, you had a Death Lord that was just like a really, really old, really powerful ghost. Like it had been human at one point and had like gotten worse from there. But if you were an Infernal, your master was like a demon that was so big that it couldn't be contained into one form. Each one of them had all these different aspects of their personality that seemed to be separate beings, but they weren't. So they would be like at war with themselves sometimes, lots of internal contradictions. And so a lot of that stuff definitely has filtered through or has just been an inspiration for us for sure. The sci-fi thing that we're trying to do, though, that's not really present in that material. And that's where things like, I would say, Mothership and Eclipse Phase, you might see those present. Or we could be like adjacent to those things, I guess would be a good way to say it.
So with all this amazing lore or potential lore that you've built and that the players will build, this is a system agnostic setting. Now apparently in the book you have ways to kind of bolt this onto various systems. Why don't you tell me more about that?
Sure.
You want to go for it?
Let's roll for it.
All right. Roll initiative. So we didn't want to tie this down to any one setting, and we didn't want to create our own setting because there are so many small indie RPGs out there with their own unique settings, and for me it gets overwhelming to have to learn all of these different systems, or even if you're willing to do so, which I love reading game books, so I can get into the nitty gritty of it. But if you're bringing it to a table full of people, not everyone's going to want to learn something new all the time. So we thought it would be better if we had made it open to adaptation to whatever your favorite game is. And we only add one thing into the game, which is the conduit mechanic, which is your tie between your dreadful ancient thing and your character. It's the power level, the connection that you have back and forth between those two entities. But we have,
if you're a wire, how much of their electricity can you carry?
Right. What gauge wire are you?
Exactly.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. And so in the main book, we've got Mothership, Genesis, 5e, and what else
Fate,
do
of
we do?
course.
Fate, Powered by the Apocalypse as
Right.
well. And we include 5e in there because let's face it, it's the biggest game. Everybody plays it, and there's just more people that have that accessible to them.
Mhm.
But honestly, 5e is not the preferred system for this game. It's very crunchy. It's very on the rails, adapting a very open-ended character-driven experience to the 5e mechanics is going to be a lot more difficult to express your character's uniqueness.
Yeah.
So it's there and it can definitely work, but big open games like Genesis, like Fate, like Powered by the Apocalypse, because you'll essentially be making your own playbook if you're using Powered by the Apocalypse to create your character. Those sorts of systems really work well with our setting because
Yeah.
they don't hinder your character creation
Right.
process at all. Yeah, narrative dice, any game with narrative dice would be perfect for this setting because it's all about the conversation between yourself and your storyteller, and having a narrative dice system really allows you to just vamp on
Right.
what exactly is happening in any given moment, and that's what this is about.
So one of the things that is exciting is you have something else coming out. So it's an addition to what you have right now. Why don't you tell me more about
Sundered Sundries is what it's called. It's a 3-part menagerie of just expansions for the game. We've got a trifold NPC pamphlet that gives you random tables and a backstory for this horrible character who might be able to fit into your games at a moment's notice. And basically he's this conspiratorial character who has a really horrible worldview and has been consumed by it, and he's almost his own DAT in a way. His
right?
horrible worldview has turned him into this otherworldly monster, and he's infecting regions of space. So the options open for you and your players if you want to fight him, join him, or use him against others or for your own power or whatever. And the worst part of all is that his manifesto can regenerate him after you do what you will. So that's a fun little randomization NPC that you can tuck in wherever you might need. We've got at least 3 new species that are being put into a little 5x5 by 8x5 zine. It's probably going to be about 12 pages. If we hit some more stretch goals, either now or when we go to physical print for this, then we'll be writing some more. And all of the species, both in the main book and in the expansion, are usable either as player character species, inspiration therefore, or just as NPCs, something to help flesh your world out as a storyteller.
Right.
And
they're not the species of this world. They're some species. They're just maybe they're out there, maybe they're not. Take it or leave it.
Right, exactly.
Yep. Ideas for you to jump on and carry off as you will. And in the same vein, we have a number of new Dreadful Ancient Thing cards as well. Our main book comes with a little pouch inside with a seal, and when you break the seal, you get to explore our Dreadful Ancient Things that probably have, let's see, there we go. We've got individual cards and individual Goetic-esque seals for all of our DATs, and now you'll have more of those, and they'll be coming on cards in the same size and shape, so you can tuck them away in your grimoire if you have a physical copy of the main book, or they'll fit into the same aspect if you have the digital copy of it. So just a few more ideas to round your game out. And we'll also be adding a booklet that has what are we doing, 4 new game rule sets?
It could be 4, it could be 3. I kind of lost track. The ones that I know I want to do and I feel like I can do, Zabar Hender, because I've played that, and even though it's a medieval-ish Renaissance fantasy setting, it's got that sort of grim dark quality, and I liked what the rules suggested. Basically, anybody who does magic in that world has a chance of becoming really horrible, mentally, physically, spiritually. So I was like, yes, okay, yes, Zabar Hender for sure. And I want to do Prowlers and Paragons, which is a superhero system, but what's great about that is there is no need to feel that 5e sense of confinement to, you know, class features. You can build your character's powers to work in any way you can think of. You know, you take a basic power, flight, and then you add pros and cons. Well, it's astral flight, but he has to charge up to do it. Well, how does he charge up? Well, he eats babies. Sorry, that's just how he does it. So, you know, P is a great system in its own right if you want to do like a 4-color thing or whatever, but I think it's definitely adaptable to this. If nothing else, it has that sense of the rules assume this big range of possibility and a big power scale. So even though it's meant, I think, for, you know, classic superhero stuff, it can work for cosmic evil. I just know it can.
Yeah, I would love to do Blades in the Dark as well. I understand it's sort of tucked into Duskfall and it's steampunky setting, but it's a really amazing heist game with incredible flashback mechanics. And if you're talking about a group of essentially cultists or Kabbalists, that can easily become a gang that it has power motives and is going to go about performing Ocean's 11 style heists to get what they want done. And I think the flashback mechanics would come into play in an Almost Bow game spectacularly. So I think that would be another relatively open-ended storytelling, narrative-focused game that would host well. So I think we're going to do those 3, and then we plan on doing a poll on our Twitter account at Bleak_press, and we're going to throw out a couple of other popular games and see what people want us to try to work with.
So if we go back to the original campaign, Ryan's character, they're ancient, sort of like, well, you can read the description in the book, but one of the things about Nentuk was that she opened these feeding mouths. She's like in this other area of reality, and she opens these like maws into our world so she can suck in debris or like whole planets, just eat stuff. But she can have more than one open at a time, and so sometimes her champions pass through them. So what that let me, this is all Ryan's material that I was working with. So it's like, okay, so it's a way for you to teleport, basically, to cover huge distances. But it's also, even for something that was made by this ancient, like, it's got to be disconcerting and uncomfortable and dangerous. You're
that
basically,
would be pretty disconcerting, actually.
Yeah, you're like being sucked into this huge thing's mouth and then spit out the other side of its mouth somewhere else. So when we were doing that in play, that's when I had a conduit role come into play. It's like, well, let's let the dice decide how difficult and disconcerting this was for you. So in a way, you can think of it as a kind of resistance role. It's like, well, okay, my ancient is going to work through me. How much do I mitigate that? Like, is it real bad, or is it just kind of awkward? I think another way that emerged that we ended up using it was people using it more actively. Like, my character has had enough experience having this power pass through me that I'm gonna knowingly trigger it somehow because I'm confident I can survive the effects. So you can think of it as a more passive stat or a more active one, and this is something that's in our rules conversions in the zine. You know, is it like a resistance sort of role where you're just trying to see, you know, how much of the bad after effects do I shrug off, or it can be a more active stat where you're trying to invoke the power on purpose to make things happen for you.
I think also part of the fun of it is that based off this idea of entropy, you don't have control over your ancient's powers. So if you invoke them, there's a good chance that there's a residue left over from them, or you're opening up wherever you are into the chaos of your ancient. So narrative dice, I think, work really well in this regard, especially because if you do fail on a conduit roll, you might still get what you want, but you're going to get a whole lot else as well. And as an example of my character and being a champion, if you were to sort of come through that portal or leave through one, if you rolled badly enough, or if you chose instead to do this, to maybe fail your roll on purpose or whatever, you might leave a permanent rip in reality there that she's pouring through. So you might doom the place that you're at because you tried to utilize the power of your dreadful ancient thing, and things went bad. And so now they're pouring in through that rip in space or that power usage. So I think there's a flexibility there.
Some of the other things we toyed with Ren were like, well, maybe you get spit out somewhere far away, just not exactly where you wanted, or you hop into one of her feeding maws and come out the other, but there's also this asteroid she was trying to eat at the time, and now you have to deal with it's you and the asteroid coming out at the same time. So there's all sorts of different ways you can take it in interesting, difficult, fun directions.
Well, that's great from the standpoint of where everything's at right now and where everything will be, because the Kickstarter's ongoing right now.
It's Itch, actually, where the first book was on Kickstarter for Zine Quest 3 last year, and that's all done. You can get digital copies on Itch or Drive-Thru-RPG, and you can get physical copies through a number of different retailers, both online and physical, here in the US, in Canada, and in the UK. And currently, Sundered Sundries is itch funding for its digital version for the zine month that all of us indie creators have come together to try to push push away from Kickstarter, essentially push away from that kind of conglomeration.
The one last thing I want to talk to you about is artists. So who did the artwork for Almost Bow, and who did the artwork for your companion piece to this?
I have to brag a lot on this guy right here. Ryan did a lot of the artwork for Almost Bow and really set the tone for the other art that we included. So this dude right here is a large part of the answer to your question.
Oh, thank you.
Bravo.
Thanks. Yeah, I did all the layout and design work and a lot of the artwork for the original book and for the new expansions. We also have a great friend in J.N. Butler. They are an incredible artist that does a lot of work in the indie world, and we discovered them on Twitter, and I fell in love with their work, and we've been trying to work with them as much as possible.
Yeah. Jan has this great ability to take the stuff that we present them and turn around something that is both like accurate to the spirit of what we intended and also new. For instance, their piece in Sundries, they've illustrated a horrible species of being called the Vor. And I had a sort of vague mental image. I'm more of a word person, so my mental picture of the Vor was not super well defined, but we described them to JN, and what JN turned around made me go, whoa, yeah, okay, yeah, it's that, sure, love it. So we had a couple of other people help us out in that regard. So like our Kickstarter video, the sort of promotional video at the top of the page there, it was images that Ryan drew, animated by my friend Drew Davis, who's on YouTube, Ninetail Hobbies. Drew's animation, I think, was really simple and clean and fitting for that. We had Heather Garland, another friend of mine, had a piece in the book. I'm not leaving anybody out, am I?
I'm pretty sure that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're for Sundries, we're also commissioning a piece by David Hoskins, who has done a number of different indie RPG illustrations. And I saw his depiction of an elder thing from Call of Cthulhu and Lovecraft mythos.
Yeah.
And it was incredible line work. And also in, oh, what's it called? I'm blanking now. There's a series of zines that have been popular throughout the last couple of zine quests. And I found his art in those, and we hit him up as well. And he's just Through Alton's Door. That's what it's called, the Through Alton's Door series. He's done some artwork for them, very Art Nouveau influence on some of his work. And so we're pulling him in for a piece in the Species book.
Nice.
As well, Sundries.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah. I want to thank both of you for coming on. I love the character creation aspect of it because I love that world building piece to it. And I appreciate both of you, and I think you've done a great thing.
Well, thank you so much.
See what else you do.
Thanks. Thank you for having us. We really appreciate you allowing us to come on here.
No, thank you for allowing me to interview you. We can go back and forth like this all night.
But thank you.
Thank you guys again. Again, everyone, I will have links below to everything we've talked about. Go out, take a look at it. I can guarantee you will not be disappointed. Again, just the first 5 or 6 pages that I went through, just the vignettes in between the chapters, to me set the tone for the entire setting. And I think you're going to love it. Thank you again for coming on. I hope to talk to you again soon. Let me know if you need anything from me.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's watching.
Yep. I'll talk to you soon.